everybody. Welcome to the Truth Behind the Crime. I'm Rocker Mike. Gentleman to your left right there is Mr. Rob Rossi. How you doing, Rob?
How you people doing? How's everything, Mike?
Okay, pretty good, Rob. I just want to introduce ourselves. I'm Rocker Mike, like I said, and that's Rob Rossi. We are brand new to Gnostic TV. Like to say hello to the audience there. We've been in the true crime world now for about 2.5 years. We've been doing podcasts for 5 years. The last 2.5 years, we've done a show on the Son of Sam murders. It was called the Son of Sam Chronicles, and you can still see that on YouTube. Our YouTube site is called Getting Lumped Up, and you'll see the two of us there, and subscribe and hit like if you can. But we're on Gnostic TV now, so I just want to give a shout out to everybody here watching, and thank you for tuning in. We are going to be talking about different true crime situations, crimes, murders, every week pretty much with this. Well, I guess we're going to be like a monthly show, right, Rob?
Yeah, probably a monthly show. If we
Monthly,
can get
right,
2 shows a
right.
week, that'll be 2 shows every month. That'll be incredible. But it'll probably be 1 show a month.
Yeah, one show. We'll see how it goes. Also, when we did the Son of Sam Chronicles, it was very intense. We were teamed up with Son of Sam survivor Carl Denaro. We got in very, very deep with these shootings and all the conspiracies. And this is going to be a little bit of a lighter show than what we've done. Some episodes will be one and done, like this one today. And some will have multiple parts. It'll just be like whatever happens. So again, thank you for tuning in. And today's episode 1 of The Truth Behind the Crime, is called The Murder of Roseann Quinn. It's also known as the Goodbar murder. That's Roseanne right there. Roseanne was a 28-year-old school teacher. She taught the deaf in the Bronx, and she was brutally murdered on January 2nd, 1973. This particular murder was the influence for the book Looking for Mr. Goodbar, the film of the same name starring Diane Keaton, and also a book that came out a few months after the movie called Closing Time. I have both these books here today. You can take a look at them. I don't know if you could see it. Okay, yeah, that's Closing Time, right. And that is Lacey Fosberg who wrote that right there. Sadly, both authors of these books have passed away. But we're going to talk about the crime, what happened here. We're going to talk about the books. We're going to talk about the film. We're going to talk about how this kind of affected things in society. Ironically, we did 30 shows about the Son of Sam, which was probably the most notorious murders that went on in New York City history, definitely in the 1970s. And interestingly, this was around the same time. The murder was a few years before.
Yes.
Son of Sam stuff started in 76. This happened in 73. But the film came out in 77, which was kind of like right in the middle of those shootings that went on with Son of Sam. So it's very interesting that they did happen around the same time period.
But you know what, Mason, that area of which she lived 253 West 72nd Street, like today, that's like a nice area. Back then, it was like rough.
50 years ago, that was a rough neighborhood. In fact, the building that she lived in about 5 years prior to her untimely death was actually a hotel. And they had fixed it up and converted it into rentals, which was very common in the 70s and 60s. A lot of converted hotels that's it right there. It became a doorman building when it wasn't prior to that. So she thought when she moved into that neighborhood that it would be fairly safe. And we'll get into the particulars of what happened here with her. I'll give you a little background now. Roseann M. Quinn was born November 17th, 1944.
Yeah.
Basically, she was born in the Bronx to an Irish-American family, very Irish Catholic family. Yeah. Father's name was John Quinn. The mother's name was also Roseanne. She had 2 brothers, John and Dennis, and a sister, Donna. Okay. Now, when Quinn was 11 years old, her family moved to Mine Hill Township near Dover, New Jersey. Her father was an executive with Bell Laboratories out there. And when she was 13, Roseanne spent a year in the hospital after a back operation due to scoliosis, which is a curvature of the spine.
Yeah.
Okay, and that left her with a slight limp. Okay, what are we looking at there, Rob? What is that?
That's the family.
Oh, that's the family. Right, right. I think this might have been the funeral.
Yeah, the funeral with the brother, the father, the mother.
Right, right, right. Okay.
That's what that was.
Yeah, yeah. You know, not a lot is known about Roseanne. Really, when this horrible murder happened, and I'll go into the details soon. Her family was not very cooperative with giving information to investigators or the press, media, anybody who was looking to find out more about her. Um, it she was known in her building for, people said that she took guys home from bars. Okay, now I guess it's true. Okay, because she did take home the gentleman that did kill her. Okay,
Yeah.
but I think in my research and watching the film and reading these two books, I think the media really had a free for all with this and really exaggerated her life. Okay, this was a time. This was a murder that was of its time and in its time. What
Yeah.
I mean is, this was the early 1970s. Uh, we've come a long way as a society in the last 50 years. Women were just starting to get into the workplace. She was from a conservative Catholic family.
Yeah.
She was a single girl living alone on the Upper West Side. It's a little bit seedy in those days. Now you can't even afford to live there.
Yeah.
But in those days, it was a little seedy. And she liked to party. She was a kindergarten teacher of the deaf at
But
the same.
Mike, think about that. You're dealing with deaf people all the time. By the end of the day, you just want to get drunk and get laid. Think about it.
Well,
If
yeah,
that was a guy, nobody would have a problem. But since
right,
it's a girl,
because it's a woman,
you know,
there's a little bit of a double standard
there's
there,
a double standard.
unfortunately.
But you know what? Think about it. She's dealing with deaf kids all the
Yeah.
time. Probably like, you know, that got to be rough.
Well, she was very educated. Okay,
Yeah.
she attended Morris Catholic High School in Denville, New Jersey, and she graduated from high school in 1962. Now, in her yearbook, she was known as very easy to meet, easy to know, very nice person. She enrolled at Newark State College, which is now known as Keene University, and she majored in elementary education. She wanted to be a teacher. She graduated from that college in 1966, and after graduating, she moved into New York City. She taught for 3 years in Newark, okay, and then in September 1969, she began teaching at St. Joseph's School for the Deaf in the Bronx, okay. I actually passed that place recently. It's still there.
Wow.
Okay, it's a very old brick building. You could see it from the Hutchinson River Parkway. And she was very popular. Her coworkers loved her. The students loved her. Okay. And by May of 1972, she moved into the apartment at 253 West 72nd Street in Manhattan, the Upper West Side. Like I said earlier, it was a hotel. It was called the Hotel West Pierre, and it had been converted into apartments. Now, she was known as a quiet lady. Okay. She didn't bother her neighbors, anything like that. But she liked to hit some of the local bars. There was a bar across the street called Tweeds.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's WM Tweeds or something like that.
Not
And
related
she,
to Boss Tweeds.
nope, not like Boss Tweeds, a place we used to go to down on the Lower East Side. That's funny. I was thinking of that when I was reading it. She was known to sit in the bar sometimes and read by herself. Okay. But she was social. If the mood struck her. Okay, that's the impression I get. She was very outgoing, very friendly. She had friends of very diverse group of friends, interracially. She had friends. She knew artists. She knew other teachers. All these people were kind of in her circle.
Mike, you can see the bar in the background. You see that?
Yes, there I see that. That would be from right across the street.
Yeah,
From her apartment building. There was also another bar on that block, I believe, called the Copper Hatch.
I think this is a picture of the Copper Hatch.
That might be the Copper Hatch. Yeah. I mean, this looks like a bar we'd hang out in today, right?
Yeah.
So, like I said, she was very friendly, and she had some interesting techniques, I guess, to meeting people. She could, because of her training with deaf kids, she could read lips. So she could pick up conversations from across the room. It's interesting to know how to do that, right?
Yeah, and she always came with a book. Also, had a glass.
Right. She loved to read the book, read while she was in the bar. It's just what she did. She was a very interesting person. So she decided to go for some night courses at Hunter College. And by 1972, she completed about half of those that she needed for her master's degree in her specialty of teaching deaf kids. So later that month, she attended the faculty Christmas party at St. Joseph's School and a party for the children the next day. This was Christmas of 72, which would sadly be her last. Okay. Wow. She reportedly developed a habit of meeting men and taking them home from some of these bars that she hung out in. On one occasion, her next door neighbor surprisingly had heard a outburst in the apartment. There was some screaming and obscenities being yelled, and she witnessed a man dashing out of the apartment yelling obscenities, and then Quinn was found with a black eye.
Yeah,
this is what happens sometimes.
Was that the guy named Fred?
Yes, right. That was a guy named Fred that they would look at as a possible suspect. Okay. I believe he was a black gentleman that was friends with her and, ended up hitting her. She had actually pressed charges, and he had I think there was some kind of, what do you call it? An order of protection or something like that. You had to stay away from her. So what happened is on the evening of New Year's Day, 1973, Quinn went across the street from her apartment to the bar WM Tweeds that we.
Mike, you know what I think? I think that might have been the 31st. I think where they found her was on the 2nd.
No, on the evening of New Year's Day. New Year's Day would be the 1st. She didn't do anything on New Year's Eve for some reason. She didn't go out with anybody.
The only reason I was thinking New Year's Eve because they told her she didn't show up to school for 2 days.
Right. There would have been nothing on the 2nd, and then she wasn't found until I think the 3rd.
The 3rd, all right.
Yeah, so I guess the 3rd in the morning, they said, well, where is she? We'll get into that in a second.
Yeah.
So that night of New Year's Day, 1973, January 1st, she went across the street to visit the bar, WM Tweeds, that she was a regular at. Yeah. And in there, she met a man named John Wayne Wilson. Okay. And Wilson was with a friend named Geary Guest. That's him right there, John Wayne Wilson. I'll give a little background on him. He was a young man. He basically was from the Midwest, kind of a troubled person, bit of a drifter.
Yeah.
Okay. Got in the habit of turning tricks for money. Okay. May have had a drug habit at times. Okay. He was with them, Geary Guest, in the bar, who was an older gentleman from him, who was a homosexual and had an apartment, I believe, in the West 60s somewhere nearby.
Yeah.
And he was staying with him. He had met him at some other gay bars and stuff like that. in Manhattan. I think in the Times Square area, there was a couple that he frequented that he met John Wayne Wilson. John Wayne Wilson was staying with Geary Guest.
Yeah.
They went to this bar that night to just have a few drinks. They happened to be up on 72nd Street. Guest left early by himself. He had work the next day. And he left John Wayne Wilson there for his, just to hang out a little bit longer.
Hang out, yeah.
And Wilson said he'd be home later. Well, he met Roseann Quinn, okay, and around 11 p.m. after Guest had left, they stayed a little while longer, and then Wilson and Quinn went to her apartment across the street at 253 West 72nd Street, and it's on the 7th floor, actually, her apartment.
Yeah. I would have never gone there.
No.
Oh, but she had an elevator. Okay.
Yeah. Thought you meant you never would have gone there because you would have been scared. No, definitely 7 floors. You're not walking that. Yeah. So they went back to her place. It was right there. And they got high. They were smoking weed, drinking a little bit, continued drinking, and started to make out. Okay. And apparently Wilson told a couple of stories with this. And I'll get into how he got caught in a minute. But he almost didn't get caught. Okay. It's very interesting how this went down.
Yeah.
Basically, they smoked marijuana. They had intercourse or attempted to have.
No, they couldn't. He couldn't get it. He couldn't
well,
get it.
But there's an interesting twist to that. Okay.
Yeah, I know, but because I think the guy was a little sick.
Well, I believe that he was a homosexual or at least bisexual, and might have had a problem getting it up for Roseanne. Okay, but the forensics, and in those days, 50 years ago, the forensics were not that good.
No.
Okay, but they did find semen, so he had to have had sex. Okay,
I think it was fucking her and stabbing her. That's what I think was happening.
Well, yeah, okay, and he obviously finished. Or there's another theory, is that he actually had sex with her after she was dead.
That guy's a sick bastard, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, he was a sick person, definitely a sick person. Now, he got into an argument with her. One story he told is that he tried to perform, couldn't perform, and she made fun of him. Okay, and it ended up in an argument. They started fighting. It got physical. He picked up a knife that was in the kitchen. This was a very small apartment. The kitchen was right there. Okay, and basically had a struggle with her, and then ended up stabbing her 18 times, 6 times in the neck, and hitting her jugular vein, which sent blood all over the room. Okay, including the back of where they were struggling on the back wall. Okay, it's like a headboard area, if there was a headboard. And several times, probably about 16 times in the abdomen, puncturing her liver and other vital organs.
Look at the room, Mike.
What's that?
That's a picture of the room.
Yeah. When the room was opened up after 2 days, that was what it looked like. There was a struggle. They found her body in the bed. Her body was so covered in blood, and the blood had dried up so much that it was like hard and like caked onto her. If you could picture that.
He also put a towel over her.
He put a bathrobe over her.
A bathrobe, and I think he also put a candle in her fucking vagina.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is it wasn't just enough to basically rape her before or after death and stab her 18 times. He actually inserted a large candle into her vagina. It's interesting because the forensics, apparently, according to the medical examiner, didn't show rape. Okay, the normal lacerations and things you would see internally and stuff related to rape. Does that mean she wasn't raped? I mean, if she wasn't conscious,
you know what?
Okay.
You know
What's
what
that?
the my theory? The motherfucker jerked off on the candle and put it in her.
Who knows?
He's a sick
Okay.
bastard.
No, he was definitely a very sick
He
person.
had issues, this motherfucker.
And he in those days when forensics were not that good, you can get away with some things like this. Okay, what he did was he showered
Yeah.
completely. Okay, got rid of all the blood on him. Okay, keep in mind one thing I want to mention is he also strangled her with her pants, according to him. Okay, that's his side of the story.
Yeah.
So she may have been unconscious when he raped her if she lost consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
or they may have consummated the night, and then had the argument. We don't know. Okay, we don't know. Unfortunately, there's no way to know except by his side of the story.
You know what's another interesting? They couldn't even get a fingerprint out of the
Oh
place.
well, that's what I'm getting at. Is he went in the shower and he completely cleaned up, rinsed everything off, wiped down the apartment for any prints that he could have left, anything he touched. Okay. And basically, he left. I believe he left with the knife as well. Okay, or he picked up the knife. Okay, and might have left with it. I'm not sure if they ever had the weapon, or he just wiped it down. To be honest with you, I'm not positive on that. He left the apartment. Okay, and went back to Geary Guest's house, his apartment.
Yeah.
And Guest was like, "Where the hell you been?" This was now like 3-4 o'clock in the morning. Okay, he had left him 4 or 5 hours earlier, and John Wayne Wilson said to him, "Well, that girl you saw me with, I killed her." And Geary was like, didn't want to believe it. He didn't think he really could do something like
Yeah.
that. Okay, but you know, he had a habit of trying to get money out of Geary at times. Okay. And Geary kind of thought, well, maybe this is just a way for him to get money out of me because he's saying, I need to get out of here. I need to go back down to Florida. In Florida, he had lived there earlier. He had broken out of, he was in the stockade in Miami. He had done some burglaries and broke out. He actually escaped through like a laundry room window or something like that. He got
Wow.
out and fled up north, which is why he was with Geary to begin with. But he also had a wife. Okay,
Yeah,
in
because that's
Florida.
why he went to Miami to pick up
Yeah,
his wife.
right. A young wife. She was a teenager. Okay, I think she was like 17 or 18, and she was pregnant with his child, and he wanted to get back to her anyway. So Geary gave him the money, and he flew home under a fake ID, which you could do in those days. Okay, you can't do that no more.
Nah.
Okay, and gave him enough money, to have for a few days, and paid for the ticket and all that. And then later, his wife, John Wayne's wife, Kathy, left with him, and they went from Florida to Indiana,
Yep.
particularly Indianapolis.
Yeah.
He knew some people there. Now, during this whole time, Roseann Quinn's body is still there in the apartment.
Yeah.
Okay, she didn't return to work. Okay, and that was something that wouldn't happen. She enjoyed going to work, and if she did have to call out, she would call out. She wouldn't
No,
just.
but they were saying she was on point. She pretty
Oh yeah,
much never missed a day.
no, she never missed a day, and if she ever had to, she always called.
Yeah.
And they would get a substitute teacher, which is
Mm-hmm.
what teachers do, right? So, they got concerned, and one of her co-workers called the super of the building, explained the situation, okay, and they sent the teacher to the apartment as well, met the super, okay. His name was Emedio Gizi, and he let the teacher into the apartment where they found Quinn. And you showed it earlier how it looked. It was totally a wreck. They're
Yeah.
just struggle, okay. Now, the police were called, and Roseann Quinn's 25-year-old brother, John, came to identify the body.
That must imagine that family, like a Catholic family like that, and
They, they, yeah, they basically lost it. Okay. Um, Her wake was held at Birmingham Funeral Home at 249 South Main Street in Wharton, New Jersey. And her actual funeral was held on January 6th of 73 at St. Mary's Church in Wharton, a mile from her family's home in Mine Hill. The funeral mass was led by Quinn's cousin, the Reverend John Waldron of St. Theresa of Avila Church in Brooklyn. And she was buried at St. Mary's Cemetery, which is also in Brooklyn, about a quarter mile from that church. Yeah, and what I got to mention here is that at first they didn't put this out in the paper. Okay, it didn't hit the paper, I think, until about she was found on the 3rd. I would say maybe about the 4th. Okay, I'm not positive. I don't know if you could pull up that Daily News clip thing right there. It might say it.
She was found on the 3rd.
Okay, and they put it in the papers on the 3rd, Rob?
No, I got. Let me look at this picture over here a little closer because I can't see it from there.
Yeah, yeah. I never could get a straight answer on that. But this is the front page: teacher found nude and slayed, and this is an early example of the media really blowing things up out of proportion. The Son of Sam murders in the next couple of years would be totally off the charts when it came to blowing things up. But this was an early example of that. You had a young girl who was a kindergarten teacher of the deaf. Okay. People are saying she was known to pick up guys, and this was a one-night stand gone bad. Now, 50 years later, this would never have been handled this way. Okay. In the media. But in those days, it was very sensational.
You know what? They actually put out the thing, and they didn't take it out to the 5th.
So the 5th was when it became publicized, right? I knew it wasn't right away. So 2 days later, really. Okay.
Yeah,
so
you know why? Because the news, it was a different time then. It took a
right. Now, what had happened over those 2 days is that they didn't report it, and they probably didn't want to. The cops probably said, hold off, we're investigating still. Okay. Now, Gary Guest was concerned about his friend and was reading the papers, which was how everybody got news in those days, and was looking for something indicating a murder. Nothing was there. Finally, on the 5th, you had that page right there, the front page. So when Gary Guest saw it, the name of Roseann Quinn was in there, okay, and he looked her up, and back in the days of the phone book, okay, he found her in the phone book, and he just called out of curiosity, and a police officer picked up.
Yeah.
And because he happened to be in the apartment, and he said, are you, can I speak to Roseann Quinn? And the cop, not revealing who he was, just says, no, I'm sorry, she's not here right now. And he says, oh, well, do you know when she'll be back? And he said, yeah, maybe in about 2 or 3 hours. I'm paraphrasing, something like that. Can you leave your name? And he says, no, I'll call back. So, he was concerned. What was that? Now they're saying the woman's dead, but they're in the papers, but this person is saying she's alive.
Mm-hmm.
So he got all paranoid, okay, about all this. And what happened was, now these were the days, like I say, the forensics were not that good. DNA evidence and all that was not that good. So there was little to connect Quinn with her killer because there was no prints found. Okay. No one at Tweed's knew the identity of the man with whom she had left because he wasn't a regular there.
No.
Okay. They saw him, there was one of the bartenders that she was friendly with, said, yeah, she left with a guy that looked like this, but nobody knew who he was. The crime scene was totally sanitized. He wiped everything down. And the police department was desperate. And, based on a little bit of information they had, they released a sketch on what they had. Okay. Not a good one. That really doesn't look like the guy too much.
No.
Once we saw him. Okay. But what that sketch turns out to look like really more is Geary Guest. Okay. So when this sketch was released on January 7th, okay, Geary looked at that and said, "Oh shit, I'm being implicated in this."
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. So he starts getting afraid. And he still wasn't sure if Wilson had committed the murder. Okay. But it was just, once the name was in the paper, then he knew.
That's it.
Then he knew. When Quinn's name was in the paper, he knew. He was afraid of being charged as an accessory after the fact. So he called a friend of his. Named Fred Ebb. Okay. And Ebb's personal assistant named Gary Greenwood. Guest told Ebb and Greenwood that he could not tell them what happened over the phone, but said that it was the worst thing which anyone could be involved. Okay. He said he was going to California to see them. These people were in California. And then hung up. Now, Guest arrived in Bel Air, Los Angeles at Ebb's home the next day. And then he told Ebb and Greenwood about Wilson and the murder. Guest said that he had been out with Wilson and had left early because he had to go to work the next day. Now, he said that when he woke up, Wilson had not returned to the apartment, and Guest became worried. Wilson subsequently arrived and confessed the murder to him, and Guest gave him money. Okay, this is what he's telling Ebb this. Okay. Ebb then called Geary Guest's therapist named Hadassah in New York. She said that she would contact an attorney and would call him back as soon as possible. Shortly thereafter, she and the attorney called back, and the attorney advised Ebb to put Guest on the first plane back to New York City. He also advised Ebb and Greenwood not to say a word about what Guest had told them. So now we're getting into weeks are going by.
Yeah.
In mid-March, Ebb and Greenwood flew to New York City. It took more than 2 weeks to convince Guest to talk to the police. All right, he was afraid. And he knew that he would send his friend to jail if he started talking, okay? And in those days, I believe the death penalty might have still been in effect in New York. So it could have been death row as well. Guest's lawyer contacted the police and secured Guest's immunity in exchange for revealing Wilson's location. Said, I've got information. I just want to have immunity. I don't want to go down with this. And they agreed. Okay. He explained who the guy was. Okay. He got him on the phone in Indianapolis with the police there. Okay. Yeah. Got him to talk about what had happened. Okay. The murder over the phone. And basically, the cops, the NYPD was already there in Indianapolis at the address. They had sent Detectives Patrick Toomey and John Lafferty, who were part of the 4th District Homicide Squad. Okay, wow. Sent them already there. They were like on the block already. Okay, so as soon as he got talking about it, they knocked on the door and arrested him. Okay, right there. He was brought back, extradited back to New York City, and he was brought down to the Manhattan Detention Complex, also known as the Tombs, which was a living hell. Okay. Yeah, that's him getting off the plane.
Yep.
Okay. He was a young, good-looking guy. Okay. And his life was basically over at this point. He spent several weeks in the Tombs. He was also evaluated at Bellevue Hospital, where he was determined to have schizophrenia. Okay. Probably in today's day, he probably would have been bipolar. Who knows?
Yeah.
They didn't really know that back then. This was around April 19th already. Okay. We're already into April. And he stayed in Bellevue for several weeks. They never tested him entirely for things. He was supposed to be tested for brain damage. I don't believe he was ever tested for that. His attorney that was appointed to him was trying to get him off on an insanity plea. That was the plan. So they were looking to prove some kind of brain damage that he might have sustained as a child. I believe he had hit his head or something like that as a child that they had concerned he might have been damaged. He eventually would be sent back to the Tombs. Okay. And it was there that he was having problems. His roommate didn't speak, and he was having problems with some of the guards. They called him suicidal at Bellevue. They said he could be suicidal, but he was never at the Tombs. He was never put in a cell meant for a person that could commit suicide. Okay. They were concerned with that. He had a cellmate. Okay. And usually you were kept on full watch. He got into an argument. Okay. This was on May 5th with a guard, and he threatened to kill himself. Okay. And the guard said, okay, I'll help you. And I'll get you sheets to kill yourself. So he brought him sheets. He actually did it. Brought him sheets. Okay. This is on May 5th, 1973, already 4 months after the murder. And he hung himself overnight with those sheets. Now,
Epstein style.
Yes. Okay. Epstein style. Right. Now, an investigation was held into the circumstances of this, and no charges were ever filed. Okay. I mean, I would think if you had a cop giving somebody that's talking about killing themselves the sheets to go do it, I would think that's a problem. Right? Am I wrong?
You gotta think about how horrible this guy was. He probably did the right thing.
No. I'm not. Look, I mean, you could say the guy should just, been executed, okay, for what he did, but didn't work like that, and it had to go through the process, and to just give the guy the sheets and then this would never happen today.
Oh no,
that would never happen today. That guard
would have been arrested, and
that guard would have been arrested.
Done.
Okay, I believe. All right, maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I. And I don't, I'm not saying I agree. Okay, the guy was a total dirtbag and whatever, but if you say you're going to kill yourself and then you give the guy the weapon to do it, it's kind of like you're assisting.
But how many times people say they're going to kill themselves, but they never do it?
Yeah, but he gave him the sheets. That was the That was the weapon.
There've been
he didn't even say like, "Oh yeah, you ain't going to do it." He's like, "Yeah, do it."
That's wild.
It is wild. So that was the end of that case. Now,
and Gary got immunity, right?
Gary got immunity. Okay. About 1979, okay, several years later, Gary Guest would die in a fire in his apartment that he had. Okay. He would be asphyxiated in a fire. There's really nobody around from the story. Okay. The family never spoke.
Yeah.
Okay. They were very quiet, very private. What had happened was.
And what happened to Katie Wilson?
Katie Wilson?
The pregnant woman.
Oh, yes, Kathy.
Kathy.
Yeah, Kathy, on the night that he died, the husband, John Wayne, she gave birth to a stillborn baby. Sad.
You know what's crazy? It's like everybody got what was coming to them in a weird way.
Yeah, it was like the chalkboard was erased, like just
wiped them all out.
Wiped it all out. Yep. So this became a huge story. Okay. Yeah. It kind of took a life of its own. All right. Took on a life of its own. And it society in those days was a little different than now. Okay. I think that I know there were people that felt that this teacher had it coming to her, okay, because she was out with different guys often, okay. Of course, that's nobody's fucking business, okay, really. But in those days, there was a double standard. There still is today a little bit for that, okay, but not as bad as it was, say, 50 years ago. And I think that the media played off on this a lot. And they, they made her out to be really like a whore. All right. And I'm not positive that's what she was. I'd like to give her the benefit of the doubt.
You know what they did that?
Just had some bad luck,
You know what? They probably did that just for to make the religious people happy because the fan was very religious. That's
Maybe.
all it was. Oh,
Maybe.
she was like a bad, and they would try and say that women should have been by themselves. They had a different standard back then.
Yeah, well, for women, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't want women to be too independent. It's 1973. It's a whole different world, dude.
Oh yeah, people don't understand that now. It's if you're a young person and you're looking back, you're going to be like, "What the hell?" I mean, I was alive in those days. I remember the way people were treating each other. It was a little bit different than now.
Very different.
Yeah, and a author came along named Judith Rossner, who wrote a book called "Looking for Mr. Goodbar." Now you might say, "What does that mean, Goodbar?" Okay, well, in this book, she changes names around basically to protect the family. They didn't want to be involved with the book anyway.
I think the girl that was Rosa was Duncan. Was it Duncan in the book?
I believe it was something like that. Yeah, Duncan. They called it Theresa. Okay.
Yeah, Theresa. Yeah.
Instead of Roseanne.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't that loosely based. It was pretty much based on her, and I'm sure she took some poetic license with it. She changed the name of her sister and this and that.
Yeah, she didn't have brothers in that. She had all sisters, I think.
Right. And the term Goodbar is from the book where there's an actual bar called the Goodbar that she goes into. So she's looking for a guy that's Mr. Goodbar at the bar.
Goodbar.
Okay. And
you know what's the funny thing? The sister was wild because in the
movie,
the book, she was the one that was having orgies, doing all kind of crazy shit.
And that's not based on anything in real life. Okay. Yeah. And I can understand the family and friends, friends that were interviewed by people really were realizing right away how this was being exaggerated and didn't want to make a big thing and make her reputation look like shit. Okay.
Yeah.
So this book came out and then the film came out. Okay. Based on this book. And, it's pretty accurate to the book.
Yeah.
Not 100% accurate to the story. It stars Diane Keaton. Okay. Who had just basically gotten done doing the 2 Godfather movies a few years earlier. I got to point out there's an interesting part of the movie.
Easter egg. There's an Easter egg in the movie.
Yeah, a little Easter egg in that movie towards the end when, about midway through, when she meets Richard Gere, who is a boyfriend in the film, not the killer. And he sees her reading a book and she's actually reading The Godfather.
That was funny.
In the bar. So that's like a little Easter egg there. The movie was directed by Richard Brooks. Okay. Did very well. It was a 2-hour film. It starred Diane Keaton, Tuesday Weld, sex pot that she was in those days. Okay. She plays the oldest sister. And Tom Berenger is John Wayne Wilson, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. He has a different name in that movie. The name that they use is Theresa Dunn, not Duncan. Yeah. Okay. They set the story in Chicago, first of all.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is not accurate. Okay. And they get into some things about Theresa possibly being insecure about her body image. She had a scar on her back from the scoliosis operation. None of that is really, we don't know if that's real or not.
Dude, when they put her in the living room on that fucking
Yep.
With the body cast, that was like, oh man.
Yep.
That movie was pretty interesting because there was also time that I think she was hallucinated. She was
she would like daydream.
Yeah.
Okay. And like there's one scene, you slowly see her, devolving into, going to the clubs, the discos, the bars every night.
Doing drugs and
doing cocaine, getting high. okay, hanging out with some unsavory people.
Yeah.
And, she has a problem with Richard Gere. His name is Tony. He's a bit abusive in the film, mentally and physically.
Yeah, because he's the one. I think that's the guy that gave her the black eye, and they made that scene. But it was the sister that found her.
Yeah. They kind of put that in there a little bit, okay? And then, she gets mad at Tony, and she, kicks him out and goes out and just happens to meet, they call him Gary in the movie.
Yeah.
Okay. It's really John Wayne Wilson.
Yeah.
And basically, you see a very brutal murder scene. Now, I remember when this movie came out, okay? And, HBO was about the only place you could see it. I wasn't going to see it in the movies. I was too young. HBO must have put it out maybe a year or two later. We had HBO.
Yeah.
My mother would not let me see that film. There were two movies that came out around the same time there that she would not let me see: Taxi Driver and Looking for Mr. Goodbar. And I saw it maybe a couple of years later on the sneak, maybe when I was about 12. Okay. And was like, holy shit, this is nuts. Okay. And Diane Keaton is playing against type in that film. Okay. It's not really a part you would have expected. She also had done Annie Hall that year. Okay.
Yeah.
Tuesday Weld got an Oscar nomination for supporting actress. She didn't win. And it got a nomination for like best cinematography, I believe, which it definitely did have some cool cinematography. And it had a great soundtrack.
Yeah, they had
a great soundtrack, a disco soundtrack mostly. Donna Summer,
yep.
Elma Houston. If you like that stuff, it's good, Then what came out in later that year in 1977 after the movie was another book called Closing Time: The True Story of the Goodbar Murder by Lacey Fosberg. I think you had, there you go. That's Lacey. Okay. I believe she wrote for the New York Times. Is that right? I think so. Truman Capote gave her a blurb on the back of the book. Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, it's just some cool stuff. And again, another book. They took the names out of, they changed the names around.
Yeah, she wrote for the New York Times.
Yeah. They changed the names around. They added some characters, took away some characters, changed some of the story, got into the investigation a little bit more than the first book. Okay. And then there's a film called, it's a 1983 TV movie starring George Segal, of all people, called Track Down: Looking for the Goodbar Murderer. And it's a pretty bad movie. Okay, I don't know what network it was on. I don't remember.
But they did a lot of things. Like they showed when he picked up in the bar, she put her hat on, and then they go back to the house.
It shows. First of all, they set it in 1983, which was wrong. Okay. They have this other subplot going on that George Segal is this detective. His marriage is falling apart. And his kid is going away to school, and he doesn't want that. So you have this whole other subplot going on. But basically, he picks up the murder as a detective, and he answers the phone.
Yeah.
Gary Guest calls.
Yeah.
Okay? So that was interesting that was put in there. Okay. And then it deals a lot with the ongoing investigation, going out to Indianapolis, arresting him. You don't see what happens with Wilson with the suicide. You just see it written at the end that it happened.
Yeah.
But I think, for a TV movie, it wasn't that bad, but it was pretty bad. But it had some good parts in it, I thought.
Yeah, but it was bad.
See it on YouTube. So that's all I got today. Episode 1 of
that's pretty good, man. You know what? I read about it. I didn't really read about it. Then I saw the movie. Then I started looking at everything else, and I was like, God damn, it's crazy. You just got crazy.
Yeah, and this was 1970s New York, and it was a dangerous place.
Yeah.
Okay, it's kind of getting dangerous again, right?
You know what? It is
not
what
the
it
same.
is.
It's not the same. But
to me, I don't think it's like it was back then. Like back then, it was. Back then was rough.
It'll never be like back then. You know why?
Yeah.
Phone. We're all preoccupied with this. Okay.
Yeah.
We the internet is the great pacifier. Okay. You'll never have like what you had in the 70s with people with nothing better to do than fucking mess with people.
Yeah.
Okay. You get it now a little bit, but not like then. So that'll never happen again. Thank God. Okay. Also that neighborhood is totally changed.
Yeah.
Okay. Even the bar is the bar owner Tweeds. He closed that bar for about 6 months after the murder and then reopened it with a different name.
Wow.
And it lasted for a while and then it closed. I think it made it to the turn of the century, into the 2000s.
Wow.
But it closed. Yeah, I mean, it different times now, and I think that had this murder happened today, it would not have been sensationalized the way it was. You wouldn't have had this kind of like, this girl's like a whore and kind of deserved it. Kind of.
Oh, it would never say that. But
Yeah.
if you look at the way they were talking about it, it was like, God damn.
Yeah, which is why everybody clammed up. The friends and the family didn't actively give information about her because they saw what it was turning into.
Yeah.
So all right, Rob. So anybody, I guess we should give our handles.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I'm Rocker Mike, and if you want to find me, I'm on Facebook under Rocko Mike, and you can find us. We have other podcasts. Okay. On YouTube, we have The Rock Show, which is our music show. We have the Rocker Mike and Rob Presents, which is our interview show. We interview all kinds of people. These are on our YouTube channel, Getting Lumped Up. We will be bringing over the Conspiracy 420 podcast to Gnostic TV. You guys will see that. We've had issues with YouTube with that show. Of course, you can hear our show audio, okay, on all the engines like Pandora, Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, all that under Getting Lumped Up. I'm Rocker Mike 212 on X, Rocker Mike 212 on Instagram. I'm Rocker Mike on Truth Social, MeWe, Clout Hub, Getter. I'm just Rocker Mike. And where can we find you, Rob?
And you can find me on Facebook, X, and on Instagram just by looking Getting Lumped Up, and my big head will pop out.
And that head is big.
Yeah. And then we also got the Getting Lumped Up website, which is gettinglumpedup.com. You can log in there too. And that's pretty much all the places you can find me. And then you can also find me at the International Bar, Sunday through Wednesday, bartending.
Right. The East Village in New York City.
Yeah.
And good chance you'll find me on the customer side of the bar. All right. So thanks again for watching the first episode of The Truth Behind the Crime. I'm Rocker Mike, and we got Rob Rossi, and we'll see you next time. In the meantime, what do we always say, Rob?
Don't get drunk.
Get lumped up.
And remember, people, don't commit any crime or we'll come after you.
That's right. Take care.